Right. Have you, have I complained, murmured lately? There's a question that we want to look at today. In 2015, I was reading this article online this week. 2015, this is from 2015. The number of complaints made online and on social media sites was 879 million complaints people made. And this was just for United States, Canada, and some countries in Europe. And what the article went on to say, I was reading another one from Psychology Today, is that with the advent of social media and technology, society has turned into a complaining one because social media affords us the luxury of complaining with anonymity. We don't have to be there physically present. We could sit and hide behind a computer to make a complaint. So whereas in the past, one had to go to complain to a company, now one could sit home and complain. So one of the features that psychologists have been examining was that in the 21st century, they have seen the rise of a society that tends to want to complain more. And what they're saying is that this complaining that society does empowers the people who complain. The Hebrew word for complaining in the Bible was used for grumbling, murmuring, is teluna. And what it means is continuous complaining, moaning, and constantly grumbling. If you had a child, a toddler, you would know about complaining. I saw this on Facebook and I have lived through this. Before I became a parent, I never knew I could ruin someone's day by giving them the wrong cup. And it's a fact. No one could complain more than a toddler who wants his or her own way. And that toddler would complain incessantly. And sometimes we as parents just give in. Now, this morning, I want to spend some time looking at the group of the champion complainers. And these people were the children of Israel. So let's begin in Exodus 15. We'll spend a lot of time in Exodus today. We'll be reading verses 22 to 24. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days, they traveled in the desert without finding water. Well, they probably had a legitimate reason to complain because they would have been thirsty. I'll drop down to verse 24. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" And God used this opportunity to perform another miracle for them. He had just performed one 3 days ago. And this miracle was one where he told Moses to take a branch and throw it into the water, and the water miraculously stopped being bitter, and it was able to be drunk by all there. So he used this opportunity to perform a miracle. Interestingly, in the next chapter, 16, Exodus 16, verses 1 to 3. So 1 month after leaving, 20-something days after the miracle, as beginning verse 2, there too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. And they moaned, "If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt. You know, that might have been better." They moaned about that. There we sat around pots filled with meat, KFC, Royal Castle, you name it. and ate all the bread we wanted. Parmesan, rye, whole wheat, white flour. But now you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death. The interesting thing is that this was just 1 month after all the miracles God had performed. And if we read the rest of that chapter going down, we would see that God provided quail and manna for them after they complained in that chapter in Exodus 16. Lower down the chapter, it would say God miraculously provided quail, and that is when he introduced manna for them. So twice they complained, twice he provided miraculously a means for the complaint. First time, the branch. Second time, quail, manna. Next chapter. The whole community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" So just after, a short time after, they quarreled with Moses for water. And this pattern continued throughout the journeys of the Israelites. I call them the champion complainers in the desert. So let's go down to see what happened, because God answered their complaints. He provided the branch, he provided water when they complained. If we read and continue reading in chapter 17, we would see God provided water for them. One day, God became intolerant to these complaints. He probably would have had too much complaints. Numbers 11, going across the Numbers, verses 1 to 2. Now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord. And when he heard them, his anger was aroused. So God became angry. Then fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed some at the outskirts of the camp. And when the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So they were complaining again, and God got so angry that he sent fire, and some of them were hurt by this fire. Later on in the chapter, verse 4, it didn't stop them. The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, "If only we had meat to eat." We remember the fish broth, the roast fish in Egypt at no cost. Really? Also the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and garlic. We are missing garlic and onion. But now we have lost our appetite. And this is after being fed with manna. We never see anything but this manna. God provided manna for them. And they are complaining, we want onion, garlic, leeks, cucumber. So God intervened, and this was his response. 18 to 20, verses 18 to 20. Tell the people, he was speaking to Moses here, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed, "If only we had meat to eat. We were better off in Egypt." Now the Lord will give you meat and you will eat it. And look at what God said in verse 19 and 20. You will not eat it for just 1 day or 2 days or 5, 10 or 20 days, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and you loathe it, because you have rejected the Lord who is among you and have wailed before him, saying, Why did we ever leave Egypt? We were so well fed in Egypt. Here we have manna to eat. In dropping down in verses 32 to 33, if you read the intervening verses, you will see where God sent some quail, and the quail were around the camp, up to 3 feet high. So I'm breaking into the thought in verse 32. So the people went out and caught quail all that day and throughout the night, and all the next day too. No one gathered less than 50 bushels. So I had to go and research and find out how much was a bushel. A bushel is 60 pounds. Imagine no one gathered less than 60 by 50, 300 pounds of meat. They spread the quail all around the camp to dry. But while they were gorging themselves on the meat, while it was still in their mouths, the anger of the Lord blazed against the people, and he struck them with a severe plague because they complained. So this scripture clearly demonstrates that God had become impatient with the constant grumbling, the constant complaining of the Israelites. So I just want to go to one last chapter in Numbers 14. You can spend some time in your Bible study reading about these complaining events. Numbers 14 verses 1 to 3. And this occurred after they had sent the spies to spy out the land of the promised land. And they came and said that the people in the promised land were giants and we look like grasshoppers in their eyesight. And this is what happened when that evil report came back from spying out the land, verses 1 to 3. Then the whole community began weeping aloud, and they cried all night. They had forgotten all the miracles God had done for them. Their voices rose in a great chorus of protest against Moses and Aaron, and they come back with the road march. If only we had died in Egypt. If only we had died in Egypt, or even here in the wilderness, they complain. Why is the Lord taking us to this country only to have us die in battle? Our wives and our little ones will be carried off as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? So they had this refrain of returning to Egypt every time something happened and every time they had a complaint. And this negative response and protest and weeping for the whole night, it resulted in the Israelites having to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And all the Israelites, 20 years and over, did not get to see the promised land because of that spirit of complaining. What are the implications for us today as Christians? 1 Corinthians 10, verses 1 to 3, and then 9 to 11, give us a warning. And this is a warning that we have to heed and look at ourselves introspectively when we feel the desire to constantly complain. Now, there are things that we could complain about and should complain about, but if we look at it, God doesn't want us to have a spirit of complaining or murmuring for every obstacle that occurs in our lives. He wants us to learn to trust him because he performed miracles for the Israelites. Every time they complained, he made a way out, but they still complained. And the early complaints that they made, his anger wasn't aroused. He did not punish them. It was only after continuous complaining, then his anger was aroused. So let's read in 1 Corinthians verse 10. Reading from the New Living Translation. I don't want you to forget, dear brothers and sisters, about our ancestors in the wilderness long ago. All of them were guided by a cloud that moved ahead of them, and all of them walked through the sea on dry ground. Nor, and verse 9, Nor should we put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and then died from snake bites. That was another incident. You could read it. And don't grumble, as some of them did, and then they were destroyed by the angel of death. These things happened. Why? To them as examples for us. They were written down. Why? To warn us who live at the end of the age. So that is why God allowed the record to show the complaining of the Israelites. For us who are living now, to look at that example and to warn us that we should not follow that bad example. And if we adopt that personality, character of complaining, like the Israelites, we risk angering God. And eventually, God's patience run out. But what does murmuring and complaining say about us? If we have a spirit of murmuring and complaining, it implies that we do not trust God being in charge of the situation. And we see that with the Israelites. No water, but God was able to produce water from rock. The water was bitter. God was able to make it not bitter so that we were able to drink it. So when we have this attitude of constant murmuring and moaning, it shows that we do not trust God to be in charge of the situation, whatever that situation is that we find ourselves in. It also demonstrates nearsightedness in our present circumstances. It means that we are not focusing on our walk with God, on our calling, on our future reigning with Christ in the kingdom. And that is what our focus should be on, not on physical things that are right here. We need to have hope, and the hope we get is focusing on our bright future that we are promised. And it provides Satan with an avenue to sow doubt and disbelief in our minds. Remember the first complaint in the Bible? God told us you could eat every tree, but we can't eat from that tree. And Satan used that little complaint statement to influence Eve to disobey God. So once we have that spirit of complaining, Satan finds a way to get to us. In Philippians chapter 2, we are reminded about the lives that we should be aspiring to. In verses 14 to 15, it states, do everything without complaining and arguing. Why? So that no one can criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people, or in a world full of complainers. Remember the figure at the beginning? 879 million complaints. Continuing, Jude also wrote, he warned the brethren in verse 16 of Jude. These people are grumblers and complainers, living only to satisfy their desires. And who are the people he's speaking about? We have to go back up to verse 4. Ungodly people have wormed their way into your churches, saying that God's marvelous grace allows us to live immoral lives. The condemnation of such people was recorded long ago. So Jude is equating grumbling and complaining with being ungodly, people destined for condemnation. And we should take time to examine ourselves and see whether we are allowing ourselves to become grumblers and complainers, like the champion grumblers and complainers, the children of Israel. I'm not saying that we should not complain about a situation. We could, But we should not, our personality should not be one where we constantly look to criticize or grumble. We should learn to be seeking God in all circumstances.